On the morning of September 29, 106 BC, a baby was born in the rugged region of Picenum on the eastern coast of Italy. Centuries later, this child would be remembered as one of the most influential figures in Roman history. He would command armies, overthrow kingdoms, and reshape the fate of the East. His name was Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus. Yet on that day, no one could have imagined that he would one day be known by the title Magnus, meaning, the Great. His family was one of the oldest and most powerful in the region. His father, Gnaeus Pompeius Strabo, played a significant role in the political and military history of Picenum. He became the first member of the family to rise to the Roman Senate and was elected consul in 89 BC. Alongside his achievements, however, Strabo was infamous for his greed, political hypocrisy, and ruthless nature. He inspired both fear and hatred among the Roman people. Pompey spent his childhood under the shadow of his father's reputation. While still very young, he served in his father's army during the Social War between 91 and 87 BC, where Rome fought against its former Italian allies. It was on those battlefields that Pompey first experienced the brutal reality of war. Fate dealt him its first harsh blow in 87 BC. During the civil conflict that swept through Rome, Strabo died. Before his death, he had been accused of embezzlement, leaving his young son as his legal heir to face the consequences. Pompey soon found himself standing before a court of law. Nevertheless, he managed to overcome the charges. According to ancient sources, he agreed to marry Antistia, the daughter of the presiding judge, helping secure his acquittal. In Rome, justice could sometimes be achieved through marriage as much as through the law. Meanwhile, another conflict was unfolding at the heart of Roman politics. Command of the First Mithridatic War was one of the most prestigious military appointments in the Republic. Lucius Cornelius Sulla wanted the command, but while he was campaigning in the east, the balance of power in Rome began to shift. Lucius Cornelius Cinna, Gnaeus Papirius Carbo, and the young Gaius Marius regained control of the Senate. When Sulla returned to Italy in 83 BC, it was not merely the return of a victorious general, it marked the beginning of another civil war. Yet even before Sulla reached Italy, Pompey had already chosen his side. He traveled through the villages of Picenum, gathering his father's former allies and veterans. Using his own wealth, he armed his followers and formed a fully equipped legion. A young aristocrat raising a private army without the authority of the Roman state was virtually unprecedented in Roman history. As Sulla landed at Brundisium, Pompey marched south with his newly formed army. Hoping to prevent the two forces from joining, the Roman government dispatched 3 separate armies against him. Pompey destroyed one of them and forced the other 2 to retreat. When he finally reached Sulla's camp, Sulla greeted him with the title Imperator, recognizing the young commander as an independent military force despite his age. Pompey returned to Picenum once again and quickly recruited fresh troops. By 82 BC, as the civil war reignited, he had become one of Sulla's most important commanders. While Sulla marched toward Rome, Quintus Caecilius Metellus Pius pressed Carbo's forces in the north. Serving as Metellus' cavalry commander, Pompey won victory after victory. He defeated Gaius Carinus at the Isis River, joined forces with Marcus Licinius Crassus near Spoletium, and defeated Carinus once again. Soon afterward, he ambushed and destroyed the large army of Gnaeus Marcius Censorinus near Praeneste, effectively crushing one of the last organized pockets of resistance within the Marian government. Finally, as a force of 10,000 Samnite warriors advanced toward Rome, Pompey relentlessly pursued them. At the Battle of the Colline Gate, Sulla secured a decisive victory, bringing the civil war to an end. Rome had found its new dictator. Pompey was an exceptionally talented and deeply ambitious man. He was known for expressing every emotion openly, his anger, his grief, and his joy. Unlike many Roman politicians who carefully concealed their feelings, Pompey rarely hid his. It was precisely this passionate nature that unsettled Sulla. Although Sulla admired Pompey's military genius, he also feared that such ambition might one day be turned against him. Seeking to keep the young commander away from Rome, he began looking for an opportunity to send him elsewhere. That opportunity came sooner than expected. The surviving supporters of the Marian faction had fled to Sicily, where they hoped to regroup. Waiting for them was a commander who was still remarkably young, yet whose reputation was growing rapidly. Pompey landed on the island with a powerful army. The propraetor Marcus Perperna fled almost immediately, while Gnaeus Papirius Carbo was captured and executed. Pompey justified the execution by pointing to Carbo's crimes against the Roman people. The streets of Rome, however, had already begun whispering another name, Agula Sentilis Carnifex. The young butcher. After securing Sicily, Pompey left the island under the administration of his brother-in-law, Gaius Memmius, and sailed for the African continent. At Utica, he defeated Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, who had organized the remaining Marian resistance in the region. Pompey then marched into Numidia, where the Marian-backed King Hyarbas was captured and executed. The rightful king, Hiempsal II, was restored to the throne under Roman protection. Throughout the campaign, Pompey's courage and military skill earned him enormous admiration among his soldiers. Many began comparing him to Alexander the Great, and among themselves they started calling him Magnus, Latin for the Great. It was originally nothing more than a nickname given by his own troops. Pompey, however, quickly embraced the title as his own. When he returned to Rome, he demanded the honor of celebrating a triumph, despite his young age. According to Roman tradition, such an honor was normally reserved for experienced magistrates who had held high public office. Pompey met none of those requirements. Nevertheless, he refused to disband his army until Sulla granted his request. Faced with Pompey's growing popularity and military influence, Sulla eventually gave in. To lessen the impact of Pompey's success, he awarded triumphs to two other commanders on the very same day, but the Roman people knew the truth. The true hero of the celebration was Magnus. In 80 BC, another serious threat emerged. A brilliant Roman general named Quintus Sertorius, declared an enemy of the state, had established an independent government in Hispania. Supported by Iberian tribes and Roman exiles, Sertorius proved to be a master of guerrilla warfare. He captured Hispania Ulterior, repeatedly defeated Rome's experienced generals, and gradually brought almost the entire Iberian Peninsula under his control. Rome desperately needed someone capable of ending the rebellion. Once again, all eyes turned toward Pompey. Although he still held no official magistracy, the Senate ignored tradition and granted him proconsular imperium. The decision reflected both Rome's desperation and Pompey's rapidly growing prestige. Pompey assembled an army of 30,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry. After suppressing a minor uprising in Gaul, he crossed the Pyrenees in 76 BC and entered Hispania. He expected the campaign to be relatively straightforward. Instead, he encountered the most formidable opponent of his career. The confidence inspired by Pompey's arrival quickly disappeared. At Lauren, Sertorius inflicted a devastating defeat on the young general. Nearly one-third of Pompey's army was destroyed, while Sertorius suffered almost no losses. For the first time, Pompey had been thoroughly outmaneuvered. In 75 BC, Pompey shifted his focus toward Sertorius' lieutenants, Marcus Perperna and Lucius Herennius. Pompey lost nearly 6,000 soldiers. Meanwhile, another Roman commander, Metellus Pius, managed to defeat Tertullius elsewhere in Hispania. Even so, the overall course of the war still remained firmly in Sertorius' hands. The Battle of the Sucro River ended without a decisive victor. Pompey's right wing collapsed during the fighting, and he narrowly escaped capture. His legate Lucius Afranius arrived just in time to rescue him. Soon afterward, Sertorius launched another offensive near Saguntum. Among the dead was one of his closest officers and his own brother-in-law, Gaius Memmius. Sertorius, by comparison, lost around 3,000 men. He expected the campaign to be relatively straightforward. Instead, he encountered the most formidable opponent of his career. The confidence inspired by Pompey's arrival quickly disappeared. At Lauren, Sertorius inflicted a devastating defeat on the young general. Nearly one-third of Pompey's army was destroyed, while Sertorius suffered almost no losses. For the first time, Pompey had been thoroughly outmaneuvered. In 75 BC, Pompey shifted his focus toward Sertorius' lieutenants, Marcus Perperna and Lucius Herennius. Even after years of fighting, he still seemed almost impossible to defeat. As winter approached, Sertorius withdrew to Clunia. He repaired the city's defenses, turning it into a carefully prepared trap. Then he vanished. Rather than confronting the Romans directly, he attacked their supply routes by land and sea, threatening both Pompey and Metellus with starvation. Metellus was forced to retreat into Gaul. Pompey endured the winter under extremely difficult conditions in the lands of the Vacii. The situation became so desperate that Pompey wrote an angry letter to the Senate. "You have abandoned us. Send more soldiers and more money." The Senate finally responded. Pompey received 2 additional legions. From 74 BC onward, Pompey and Metellus adopted a strategy of attrition. Instead of seeking one decisive battle, they slowly exhausted Sertorius' remaining resources. Sertorius gradually lost his veteran Roman troops. His ability to fight conventional battles steadily declined. The Roman generals began capturing city after city, while unrest spread throughout the rebel coalition. The final blow, however, came not on the battlefield, but at a dinner table. In 72 BC, Properna and several Roman exiles assassinated Sertorius during a banquet. With his death, the rebellion lost both its leader and its soul. Pompey wasted no time. He defeated Properna near Osca and took him prisoner. Hoping to save his life, Properna offered Pompey a collection of sec. He expected the campaign to be relatively straightforward. Instead, he encountered the most formidable opponent of his career. The confidence inspired by Pompey's arrival quickly disappeared. At Lauren, Sertorius inflicted a devastating defeat on the young general. Nearly one-third of Pompey's army was destroyed, while Sertorius suffered almost no losses. For the first time, Pompey had been thoroughly outmaneuvered. In 75 BC, Pompey shifted his focus toward Sertorius' lieutenants, Marcus Properna and Lucius Herennius. Pompey made his decision immediately. Without reading a single letter, he threw every document into the fire. Then he ordered Properna's execution. With the rebellion crushed, Pompey reorganized Hispania. Rather than ruling through fear alone, he restored stability and earned the loyalty of many local communities throughout Hispania and southern Gaul. The last pockets of resistance soon disappeared. At last, Pompey returned to Rome. He was no longer merely a promising young commander. He had become the conqueror of the West, and one of the indispensable generals of the Roman Republic. Pompey returned to Rome as a celebrated hero after his victory in the Sertorian War, but another storm was already raging in Italy. The Third Servile War, led by the gladiator Spartacus, continued to threaten the Roman Republic. Marcus Licinius Crassus had been entrusted with crushing the rebellion and had already achieved the decisive victory. Yet just as the war was coming to an end, Pompey arrived in Italy. He intercepted around 6,000 fleeing slaves, slaughtered them, and proudly informed the Senate that although Crassus had defeated the rebellion, he had eradicated its remnants. The statement deeply angered Crassus. From that moment onward, a fierce rivalry began between the two most successful generals in Rome. Following his victories in Hispania, Pompey celebrated his second triumph and announced his candidacy for the consulship. There was only one problem. He was too young. According to Sulla's constitutional reforms, Pompey had not yet reached the legal age required for the office, nor had he followed the traditional political career known as the cursus honorum. Under normal circumstances, his candidacy should have been impossible. But these were not normal circumstances. Pompey's popularity had grown so immense that the Senate chose to bend the law in his favor. The Republic was no longer following its own rules. It was making exceptions for extraordinary men. According to Plutarch, Pompey also supported Crassus' election as his colleague in the consulship. The gesture placed Crassus in Pompey's debt and temporarily eased the growing tension between them. Thus, in 70 BC, the two greatest generals of their generation entered office together. Although they agreed on very little, they accomplished one of the most significant political reforms of the late Republic. The powers of the tribunes of the plebs, which had been severely restricted by Sulla, were restored. The common people celebrated. The conservative faction of the Senate watched with growing anger. It was one of the defining political turning points of the late Roman Republic. While Rome struggled with internal politics, another crisis had spiraled completely out of control. For years, the Mediterranean Sea had effectively fallen under the control of pirates operating from their strongholds in Cilicia. Rome's weak responses had only encouraged them. The pirates had become so bold that they openly cooperated with both Mithridates VI of Pontus and Quintus Sertorius. In 68 BC, they even raided Ostia, Rome's main harbor, burned ships, and kidnapped 2 Roman senators. Public outrage exploded throughout the Republic. Pompey immediately recognized the opportunity. The tribune Aulus Gabinius proposed a law known as the Lex Gabinia, granting Pompey extraordinary authority for 3 years. He received supreme command over the entire Mediterranean, extensive authority on land for 50 miles inland, an enormous military budget, and the right to appoint his own legates. Many senators feared these unprecedented powers. The Roman people embraced them enthusiastically. Pompey responded with a strategy as ambitious as the authority he had been given. Instead of chasing pirates aimlessly across the sea, he divided the Mediterranean into 13 operational sectors. Each sector was assigned to one of his trusted commanders. Escape became nearly impossible. Pompey personally secured Rome's grain routes while his subordinates systematically swept the western Mediterranean clean. Within just 40 days, piracy in the western half of the sea had virtually disappeared. He then concentrated his entire fleet against the remaining pirate strongholds in the east. The decisive campaign took place in Cilicia. Pompey launched a massive assault on the pirates' principal bases around Coracesium. The resistance collapsed. In less than 3 months, a problem that had plagued Rome for decades had been eliminated. The Mediterranean once again became safe for trade. From that point forward, many Romans proudly referred to it as Mare Nostrum, our sea. Yet Pompey's greatest achievement was not the victory itself. It was what came afterward. Rather than executing the captured pirates, he offered them a new life. Entire pirate communities were relocated to abandoned inland cities. The city of Soli was rebuilt and renamed Pompeiopolis in his honor. Others were settled in various parts of Cilicia, Libya, and Calabria. Men who had once lived by robbery and violence became farmers, merchants, and loyal subjects of Rome. Pompey understood something many commanders never did. Winning a war was one thing. Winning the peace was something entirely different. By rebuilding cities instead of destroying them, he transformed former enemies into productive citizens. His reputation now extended far beyond that of a victorious general. He had become a statesman capable of reshaping entire regions. But while Pompey was securing peace across the Mediterranean, a far greater challenge was waiting in the east. The long war against Mithridates VI Eupator, king of Pontus, was about to enter its final chapter. And once again, Rome placed its future in Pompey's hands. With the Sertorian rebellion finally crushed, a new crisis had already erupted in the east. The death of the king of Bithynia, who bequeathed his kingdom to Rome in his will, created the perfect opportunity for Mithridates VI Eupator, the formidable king of Pontus, and his ally, Tigranes the Great of Armenia. Roman territory was invaded once again. The Third Mithridatic War had begun. Although Lucius Licinius Lucullus had won a series of impressive victories over Mithridates, years of relentless campaigning had exhausted his soldiers. Mutiny spread through his ranks, while political opposition in Rome steadily undermined his command. Sensing the opportunity, Pompey secured another extraordinary command and was sent east to finish the war. Before launching his campaign, Pompey made his first move through diplomacy rather than battle. He negotiated an alliance with Phraates III, king of Parthia, convincing him to invade Armenia from the east. For the first time, Mithridates found himself isolated. Realizing the danger, the Pontic king offered peace. Pompey deliberately demanded terms that no king could possibly accept. The negotiations collapsed. War resumed. Mithridates fled into Armenia, hoping to regroup. Pompey pursued him relentlessly. The two armies finally met near the Lycus River. The battle ended in a decisive Roman victory. Ancient historians describe Mithridates escaping with only a handful of loyal followers before disappearing into the forests of Colchis, along the eastern coast of the Black Sea. Pompey, however, had already shifted his attention elsewhere. Armenia had become his next objective. At the same time, Tigranes the Younger, the son of King Tigranes, had rebelled against his own father. Pompey skillfully exploited the conflict. Rather than fighting to the bitter end, Tigranes the Great surrendered. He accepted Roman supremacy, agreed to pay an enormous indemnity, and allowed Roman forces to remain within his kingdom. Instead of destroying Armenia, Pompey transformed it into a loyal buffer state between Rome and Parthia. In 65 BC, Pompey marched north toward the Black Sea and the Caucasus. Along the way, he defeated every tribe and kingdom that had supported Mithridates. He advanced as far as the lands near the Caspian Sea, pushing Roman influence farther east than ever before. His campaign was interrupted only when the tribes of Caucasian Albania revolted. Pompey quickly turned back. At the Battle of the Abas River, he crushed the rebellion, imposed harsh peace terms upon the Caucasian tribes, and secured Rome's northern frontier. Spending the winter in Armenia, Pompey also mediated territorial disputes between Phraates III and Tigranes, establishing a new diplomatic balance throughout the east. By now, Pompey was no longer simply defeating Rome's enemies. He was redesigning the political map of the Near East. Meanwhile, the once powerful Seleucid Empire had collapsed. Syria was left without any effective central authority. Recognizing the strategic importance of the region, Pompey annexed Syria in 64 BC, turning it into a Roman province. One city after another submitted without significant resistance. Antioch, Apamea, Pella, Damascus. Roman authority now stretched across the entire Levant. His next destination was Judea. The Hasmonean kingdom had descended into civil war. The brothers Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II were fighting for the throne, and both appealed to Pompey for support. Pompey sided with Hyrcanus. When Aristobulus refused to surrender, Jerusalem was placed under siege. After months of fighting, Roman forces stormed the city. Pompey entered the Temple of Jerusalem, breaking through one of the holiest places in Judaism. Although he refrained from stealing its sacred treasures, the capture of the city forever changed the political future of Judea. The kingdom became a Roman client state. Much of its territory was reorganized into the Decapolis, strengthening Roman influence throughout the region. By the time Pompey returned west, he had accumulated enormous wealth, unrivaled prestige, and the loyalty of countless cities and kings across the eastern Mediterranean. In 62 BC, he dismissed his army almost immediately after returning to Italy. It was a calculated decision. Many feared that a victorious general with such immense power might attempt to seize absolute control of Rome. By voluntarily disbanding his legions, Pompey sought to reassure the Republic that he had no intention of becoming another Sulla. The following year, in 61 BC, he celebrated his third triumph. It was one of the most magnificent victory parades Rome had ever witnessed. Gold, jewels, captured weapons, exotic animals, prisoners, and treasures from across the east filled the streets. The campaign had enriched not only Pompey himself but the Roman treasury as well. Using part of his fortune, Pompey began constructing what would become one of Rome's greatest landmarks: the Theatre of Pompey. At that moment, there seemed to be no one in Rome greater than Pompey Magnus. Yet his greatest political battle was only beginning. Despite his unmatched military success, Pompey returned to a political climate that was far less welcoming. Many senators refused to ratify the settlements he had established in the east and rejected his request to grant land to his veterans. Led by Quintus Caecilius Metellus Celer and the uncompromising Cato the Younger, the conservative faction of the Senate gradually isolated him. For the first time in years, the greatest general in Rome found himself politically alone. It was during this moment of isolation that another ambitious politician stepped forward. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar. When Caesar sought Pompey's support for the consulship of 59 BC, Roman history took a dramatic turn. Caesar's political brilliance, Pompey's military prestige, and Crassus' immense wealth formed an informal alliance that would forever change the Republic. History remembers it as the First Triumvirate. The agreement benefited all three men. Caesar was elected consul. Pompey's eastern settlements were finally approved. His veterans received the land they had long been promised. After his consulship, Caesar was granted command of Cisalpine Gaul, Illyricum, and later Transalpine Gaul, where he would begin the campaigns that made him one of history's greatest conquerors. To strengthen their alliance even further, Pompey married Caesar's daughter, Julia. The marriage was more than a political arrangement. According to many ancient writers, Julia genuinely loved Pompey, and Pompey cared deeply for her. For a time, the alliance seemed unbreakable. In 55 BC, the triumvirate was renewed. Pompey and Crassus served together as consuls once again. Crassus received command of the eastern provinces for his planned campaign against Parthia. Pompey was given authority over Hispania. Caesar's command in Gaul was extended for another 5 years. Together, the three men possessed more power than any Romans before them. Yet such a balance could never last forever. In 54 BC, Julia died during childbirth. Her death removed the strongest personal bond between Caesar and Pompey. Only a year later, Crassus marched into Mesopotamia in search of military glory. Instead, he met disaster. At the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC, the Parthians annihilated his army. Crassus himself was killed. With him died the final pillar holding the triumvirate together. Rome once again had only two giants. And the Republic was too small for both of them. Political violence soon engulfed the city. Street gangs battled openly for control. Elections collapsed. Public order disintegrated. Unable to restore stability, the Senate took an extraordinary step. In 52 BC, Pompey was appointed sole consul, an honor almost without precedent. He introduced a series of laws designed to restore order. Many of those laws also strengthened the legal case against Caesar. If Caesar returned to Rome as a private citizen, he could immediately face prosecution. Caesar refused to surrender his command. The tribune Gaius Scribonius Curio proposed a compromise. Both Pompey and Caesar should dismiss their armies simultaneously. The proposal was rejected. War had become unavoidable. While Pompey gathered troops on behalf of the Senate, Caesar made his decision. In 49 BC, he marched south from Ravenna and reached the small river known as the Rubicon. Crossing it meant rebellion. Turning back meant political ruin. According to tradition, Caesar looked toward the river and declared, "Alia iacta est. The die is cast." He crossed. The Roman civil war had begun. Caesar's speed completely disrupted Pompey's strategy. Rather than defending Rome immediately, Pompey withdrew south, believing he needed time to assemble the Republic's full military strength. The Senate followed him. From Brundisium, Pompey successfully evacuated his army across the Adriatic into Greece. Caesar lacked the fleet to pursue him immediately. Instead, he first eliminated Pompey's forces in Spain before crossing into Greece with a smaller army. The two greatest generals of their age finally faced one another. For weeks, they maneuvered across the rugged landscape around Dyrrhachium. At first, Pompey gained the upper hand. Caesar narrowly escaped complete disaster. Many believed the war was already over. But Pompey hesitated. Instead of pursuing the retreating enemy, he allowed Caesar to regroup. It was a decision he would later regret. The final confrontation came in 48 BC on the plains of Pharsalus. Pompey's army outnumbered Caesar's. His cavalry was vastly superior. Most senators believed victory was certain. But battles are not won by numbers alone. Caesar anticipated Pompey's tactics and prepared a hidden reserve of infantry to counter the expected cavalry attack. When Pompey's horsemen charged, they were driven back in confusion. The collapse of the cavalry exposed Pompey's flank. Within hours, the army of the Republic had been shattered. Pompey fled the battlefield. His political career, his military supremacy, and the Republic he had spent his life defending were slipping away. He first reached Mytilene, where he reunited with his wife Cornelia. Together, they searched desperately for a safe refuge. Most of Pompey's eastern allies had either fought at Pharsalus, surrendered to Caesar, or been taken prisoner. Only one potential sanctuary remained: Egypt. The young King Ptolemy XIII ruled one of the wealthiest kingdoms in the Mediterranean. Years earlier, Pompey had helped secure his dynasty's position. Surely Egypt would honor that debt. Or so he believed. As Pompey's ship approached the Egyptian coast near Pelusium, a small boat came out to meet him. Among the men aboard was Lucius Septimius, a former Roman centurion who had once served under Pompey's command. Recognizing an old soldier, Pompey boarded the vessel without suspicion. As the boat neared the shore, Septimius suddenly drew his sword. Together with several Egyptian officials, he attacked the unarmed general. Pompey offered no resistance. According to ancient historians, he simply pulled his cloak over his face and accepted his fate. On September 28, 48 BC, one day before his 58th birthday, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus was murdered. His head was severed. His body was abandoned on the beach.